Have you ever been home alone? That moment when the house feels just a little too quiet, and every creak and shadow seems like something, or someone, is waiting? Today we dive into 5 bone-chilling stories from people who were left alone in their homes, and what they encountered will make you think twice about being by yourself. These are true stories. Stories that are far from comforting. So sit back, lock your doors, and keep your lights on, because you might just need them. Our first story takes us to a quiet suburban neighborhood. A woman, let's call her Sarah, was alone one evening when something strange started happening. It was just after midnight when Sarah heard soft footsteps coming from the hallway. At first she thought it was her dog walking around. But when she got up to check, her dog was sound asleep at the foot of her bed. Confused, she went to the hallway and froze. At the end of the dark corridor she saw a dark figure, a shadow that didn't move like a person but more like a distorted shape. Her heart pounded in her chest. She blinked and it was gone. Terrified, Sarah ran to the front door to call for help, but when she turned around, the shadow was there again. This time closer. She never stayed alone in that house again, and to this day no one knows what that shadow really was. Next we have a story from a man named Tom. He had just moved into a new apartment. He loved the peace and quiet of being alone, but one evening his solitude was interrupted by something strange. It was a Friday night when his phone rang. He picked it up, but there was no voice on the other end. Just breathing. Heavy, labored breathing. Thinking it was a prank, Tom hung up. But the calls kept coming, at least 3 or 4 times a night. Always at the same time. The same heavy breathing. One night, Tom decided to answer. He said, "Who is this?" The voice on the other end whispered just one thing. "I'm right behind you." But when Tom spun around, no one was there. The calls never stopped, and eventually Tom moved out. He never learned who, or what, was behind that phone. This next story comes from a college student named Emily, who was spending a weekend alone in her dorm room. She had a habit of locking her door when she was inside, but one evening, something unexplainable happened. It was late, and Emily was studying when she heard a knock at her door. Thinking it was one of her friends, she opened it, but no one was there. Confused, she closed it, locked it, and returned to her desk. Then came the knock again. This time she hesitated before opening the door, but when she did, nothing. This went on for hours, knocking, opening, nothing. But each time the door seemed a little more off. The door handle would be colder than usual, and sometimes it felt like something was pushing against it. Finally, in the dead of night, after hearing one last knock, Emily decided to leave. She grabbed her things and fled the dorm. To this day she never knew what was knocking, but she never returned to that room again. This next story is one that still haunts a man named Michael. He had just moved into a new home, one that had been empty for years. He was looking forward to having the place to himself. But from the first night things felt off. There was always an odd chill in the air, and the house had an unsettling silence no matter how loud the TV was. One evening while walking down the hallway, Michael passed by an old, full-length mirror that had been left behind in the master bedroom. He stopped, staring at his reflection, when suddenly, his reflection blinked first. Michael froze. He didn't blink, but the figure in the mirror did. Slowly, he stepped closer, thinking it was his imagination, until he saw the reflection smirk at him. Michael immediately backed away, but when he turned to leave, the reflection did the same, and then it raised its hand almost as if beckoning him. After that night, Michael moved out, unable to explain the strange, menacing figure that had appeared in his mirror. Finally, we have the terrifying story of a young woman named Lisa, who was spending a quiet evening alone in her house. She had just settled in with a cup of tea when she noticed something unusual. From the corner of her eye, she saw a figure standing outside her window looking in. At first, she thought it was a neighbor, but when she turned to get a better look, the figure quickly disappeared into the shadows. Lisa didn't think much of it, until it happened again the next night. And the next. The figure would appear just after sunset, always standing there, staring in. No matter how many times Lisa checked, no one was ever there when she opened the door. Terrified, Lisa decided to call the police. But when they arrived, they found no one, yet the footprints in the dirt near the window were fresh, as if someone had been watching her all along. These 5 true stories are just a glimpse into the terrifying reality of being alone. What if you're not really alone after all? Could it be the house, or is it something else? Something that watches from the shadows? The next time you're home by yourself, remember these tales. Lock your doors, close the blinds, and never forget that sometimes the most chilling thing is the silence. Stay safe, and keep looking over your shoulder,